Just one assassination, and suddenly a whole continent goes dark, the entire map of the world gets redrawn. So today, we're going to dig into one of history's biggest, most complicated questions. What really caused the First World War? Let's see if we can piece this puzzle together.
If you look at Europe on the surface, everything seemed fine, actually better than fine. Relations between Britain and Germany, which had been pretty tense, were starting to thaw out. That old grudge between France and Germany, it looked like it was fading. I mean, just like Churchill said, it was this exceptionally quiet, peaceful time. But it was the calm before an absolutely unimaginable storm. So what on earth went wrong, right? How does a continent just enjoying a peaceful summer suddenly, just weeks later, find itself completely swallowed by a war that would kill millions and bring down entire empires? What went so catastrophically wrong? Well, the story of what went wrong, it almost always starts in one place, with that one immediate trigger, a single fateful event in a city that, honestly, most Europeans had probably barely even heard of, Sarajevo. So, it's June 28th, 1914. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who's the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, is visiting Sarajevo. And here's the crazy part. This whole day almost ended up as just a weird footnote in a history book. See, there was an assassination attempt that morning, a bomb, but it literally just bounced off the Archduke's car. It failed. But later that day, the Archduke decides to visit an officer who was hurt in that first attack. And his driver takes a wrong turn, a fatal wrong turn. And by just the most tragic, unbelievable stroke of luck, it puts them right in front of another assassin, Gavrilo Princip. He couldn't believe his eyes. He takes the shot he thought he lost, and the spark was lit. But here's the thing about a spark. It's totally useless unless there's something to set on fire. And Europe in 1914? Oh, it was a giant powder keg, just packed with these long simmering tensions, old rivalries and deep-seated fears, all just waiting for a flame. So let's take a look at what exactly made the continent so incredibly volatile. Okay, ingredient number one, the absolutely meteoric rise of Germany. After it unified back in 1871, Germany didn't just become another country on the map. No, it became an industrial and military giant that completely threw off the old balance of power in Europe. Its population just exploded. Its economy boomed. And let me tell you, its neighbors were getting very nervous. And I'm not just talking about a little growth here. The scale of this change was absolutely staggering. I mean, get this. By 1914, German factories were pumping out 2/3 of all the steel in Europe. That's more than Britain, France, and Russia combined. This wasn't just a growing economy. This was a fundamental, game-changing shift in who held the power. So, faced with this new reality, what happens? Europe splits right down the middle into two huge armed camps. On one side, you've got the Triple Alliance, with Germany and Austria-Hungary at its core. And to try and balance that out, you have France, Russia, and Great Britain forming the Triple Entente. What you end up with is a continent basically divided by a military fault line. There's almost no room left for diplomacy to work. And the absolute most explosive spot on that entire fault line, it was right here, in the Balkans. You see, the old Ottoman Empire was crumbling. They called it the sick man of Europe. And that left this huge power vacuum. And rushing right into that vacuum was this wave of really intense nationalism. You had Serbia, who was dreaming of creating a greater Serbia for all South Slavs. But that dream was a nightmare for the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which was terrified it would be torn apart. And kind of looming over all of this was Russia, who saw itself as the big brother, the protector of all Slavic peoples. I mean, what an absolutely explosive mix. Okay. So we've got the spark in Sarajevo, and we've got the powder keg of European tensions. Now let's see how, in just a little over a month, this one crisis just spiraled out of control and became an all-out continental catastrophe. It was just a terrifying domino effect. Austria-Hungary, with Germany basically giving them a blank check of support, hands Serbia this impossible list of demands. When Serbia can't agree to everything, Austria declares war, and that one move sets everything off. The alliances kick in. Russia starts mobilizing its massive army to protect Serbia. Germany sees that as a direct threat, so it declares war on Russia, and then on Russia's ally, France. All of a sudden, the dominoes are just falling way too fast for anyone to stop. And that path led them straight to something called the Schlieffen Plan. See, Germany's biggest fear, their absolute nightmare, was fighting a war on two fronts, against France in the west and Russia in the east at the same time. So what was their solution? a lightning-fast knockout blow. The plan was to smash through neutral Belgium to quickly defeat France and then turn all their forces to deal with the slower-moving Russian army. The key to the whole thing was speed. And what this plan meant was that a war with Russia automatically, no questions asked, meant war with France and an invasion of Belgium. And Germany's invasion of neutral Belgium, that was the final domino. For Britain, it was a direct threat to their security and a blatant violation of international treaties. So on August 4th, Britain declared war on Germany. And as the British Foreign Secretary, Sir Edward Grey, so famously and sadly put it, the lamps were indeed going out all over Europe. So once the war was finally over, after 4 years of just unprecedented slaughter, the question of whose fault was this became one of the biggest, most bitter historical debates of the entire 20th century. And the very first verdict? It was crystal clear and incredibly harsh. At the peace conference in Versailles in 1919, the winners wrote what's now known as the infamous War Guilt Clause, Article 231. It basically forced Germany and its allies to accept sole responsibility for everything. And this was the legal justification for demanding these massive payments, the reparations. But that first verdict didn't really stick. As the decades went by, how historians saw the war began to change. In the 1930s, for example, this idea of a collective failure got really popular. The idea that all the nations just sort of slithered into war together. Then, boom, in the 1960s, a historian named Fritz Fischer drops an absolute bombshell, arguing that Germany had deliberately provoked the war. And more recently, a lot of scholars have focused on this idea of a preventive war, a war driven by Germany's fear of the future. Fischer's thesis was, it was a game changer. He dug through archives nobody had really looked at before, and he came back with this argument that Germany's leaders didn't just stumble into war by accident. No, he said they actively wanted it. They provoked it to achieve their long-held goals of dominating Europe. This idea that the war was planned, not an accident, it completely turned the whole debate upside down. So what could possibly be the logic behind taking such a gigantic, world-shattering gamble? In a word, fear. When German leaders looked to their east, they saw an absolute nightmare scenario unfolding. Russia was industrializing like crazy. With its huge population and brand new railways, they figured that in just a few years it would become an unstoppable military giant. The German military felt like they had this tiny window of opportunity, and it was closing fast. And this quote, man, it's chilling. It's from Germany's Chief of Staff, Helmuth von Moltke, and it just reveals the mindset perfectly. He said this in December of 1912. That's a full year and a half before the shots were even fired in Sarajevo. For a lot of the top brass in Berlin, war wasn't a question of if anymore. It was a question of when, and when had to be soon, before the balance of power shifted against them forever. So, when you boil it all down, what are the big lessons here? First, that a single event, a single spark, can absolutely ignite a powder keg of old tensions. Second, that these rigid military alliances can just slam the door shut on any chance for diplomacy. Third, that the fear of what an enemy might become in the future can be a powerful reason to go to war right now. And maybe the most important takeaway of all is that the truth about something this big is never really set in stone. It's a story that we're always re-examining, always debating. And that leaves us with one last thing to think about. The story of 1914. It's not a simple story with good guys and bad guys. It's this incredibly complex web of ambition, of fear, and of tragic miscalculation. So, if our understanding of an event that happened over a century ago can change so much over time, what does that tell us about how we should try to understand and respond to the incredibly complex global crises that we're all facing right now?